lie. The level of division in this land between the races is ridiculous. It's properly like please go check out the previous part that I was speaking about, right? It's literally similar to the days of apartheid. Like, we might have been integrated into cities with one another now, like next door neighbors white, opposite front opposite colored, and then front opposite mundia, like proper. We might be integrated in the physical realm, but spiritually we're still very segregated. There is an aversion in this country for the prospect of a white president ever coming back into power again, and they are literally disregarding the fact that it's highly unlikely, like deeply impossible, for South Africa to ever go back to apartheid. Like, the fact that the reason we even came out of apartheid was because the white government was made uncomfortable underneath their buttocks to continue like this. They were ostracized by the whole planet. South Africa is not about to go back into that systematic oppression, and yet South Africans refuse to not so much vote for a white president, but that's also one of them, but so much as even listen to a potentially revolutionizing strategy that is largely recommended to them by a majority of white people. And the power cut crisis solution that is currently being tabled or governmenting just so happens to come from a bunch of white males, white men. And for those reasons, South Africa refuses. The Bible says, forgive not and you will not be forgiven. Forgive lest you should not be forgiven. Yeah, that basically something along those lines. In the scriptures, the Bible makes it clear that if you do not forgive, you yourself are not going to be forgiven. And it is precisely because of unforgiveness of the historical regime, people therein in this country, that South Africans are passing up a perfectly viable solution to get us out of the darkness. Literally darkness. It's a pitch of night. Okay, power cuts. They are passing it up just because it just so happens to come from a whole bunch of Jans. It just so happens to come from a whole bunch of Meneer van Niekerks and Van der Westhuizens and Wolmaranses. Just because it just so happens to come from a whole bunch of Smiths and like Horowitzes, like a whole bunch of white folk that live in this country, especially males. Mbana, men, white men that have been made the bane allegedly of the existence of everybody because they won't forgive those guys, because they look very, very, very similar to the ones that took away all their liberties in the days of apartheid. We are sitting on an incompetent bunch of government buffoons that refuse to realize that Eskom is literally like kicking the last kicks of a dying horse. The power grids of this nation are allegedly as old as my mama. She was born in 8. She's 63. Yeah, they're apparently about 60 years old. They were built in the days of apartheid. When we took the baton over from the historical regime, they were about 30 years old, and now 30 years later, they are choking, breathing their last. It's basically wear and tear issues. It's like driving around an old favorite car that has never been, that has run its course, basically, but because it's an ancient engine that is no longer found in the stores, you're holding on to it for old time's sake, and it is gonna pack up on you on the highway while you are en route, like using the garden route from Johannesburg to Cape Town, where help is literally hours away for you, and you're going to be stranded on the side of the road for hours before anybody can come for you, facing the risk of getting gnawed away by animals in the night, or in and of yourself just dying from starvation or fear or funny little like bandit activity from random vagrants walking around in the street, rather than literally do an engine haul and accept, for crying out loud, that at least you get to have the shell of the car, but you need a brand spanking new engine. The South African electrical grid is exactly that. They are holding on to power plants that aren't working, that they keep on patching together with sticky tape, and it's falling apart. And that's why we're having these power cuts that are lingering for as long as they are. They keep on telling us that the power cut crisis is going to linger into stage 8, 9. They are even trying to innovate brand spanking new ways to sin, like it is written in Romans 1, by inventing brand spanking new levels of this crisis, brand spanking new levels of power cut. In other words, stages, stage 10, 11, 12, 13, 20,098. They would much rather advance us in more haughty levels of power cuts, decimating the country's economy, than accept that they need to change out their engine. This engine there's a new one that is needed. How long is it going to take to build the brick and mortar structure required to make a brand spanking new power plant, and again across all the provinces, lots and lots of time. If at all they still want to maintain this current strategy of making electricity, using coal for crying, like such old ways of making electricity, if they still want to stick around to that, they're going to have to take literally just to build one power plant, I don't know how long it takes, but likely a couple of years. So are we dealing with like rolling blackouts for a couple of years? No. If at all they can do hydropower, if at all they can do wind power, if at all they can do solar power, why not? If it is far easier for it to be erected, and if there are structures in place, why not use that? Why not literally stop throwing money into sunken costs? You know, when I was a project manager at MTN, there was this whole thing that was called throwing money into sunken costs, where we had to decide whether or not we're going to keep a project or if we're going to dump it. Especially as a project manager, if you've lovingly and longingly just been waiting for the day that you're going to go live, but this thing is starting to lose its girth in the marketplace, in the sense that when the concept first was burgeoned, when it was first birthed, it was such a brilliant idea that it looked like it could get taken up in the market and do really well business wise. But then another organization decided, literally went to market first before we could go live, and it saturated the market with this product, and there was no way that we could, even being second to market, actually monetize it or do anything of value with it, because the competitor's version was just so much more advanced that there was no way we were going to do well. The decision then to make was to nip it in the bud. The decision at this point, since perhaps maybe Vodacom was first to market with it, would be to nip it in the bud and accept that this is not a product that we as MTN have to offer, and to make that decision would require lots and lots of justification and explanation to the organization, CEO, etc., as to why it is that it is important to do this thing, to basically nip this silly project in the bud, even though we have already invested 10 million into it. It would basically be us explaining that yes, we might have put in 10 million, but we're going to lose 30, but just continuing to invest resources in this deadbeat project. It would take a lot to get it uprooted because of how much money was put in it, but because of the wisdom of financial modelers and analysts, they were able to successfully convince a man to let go of 10 million rands that his company lost on a worthless project. Yeah, well, South Africa has more than enough financial modelers and more than enough project resources to give such counsel as this to let go of a project that has been running for 10 years, even though we thought it was going to be lucrative at some point. Currently, its net present value is sitting on a negative amount. So for those reasons, let it go, or the company is just going to bleed out for no reason at all. It's not necessary. It doesn't have to happen. We have this other project that is promising. You win some, you lose some. That's just the nature of business. You literally win some, you lose some. That is why we call it a bottom line, or a net income, ultimately, or a gross profit that we make as an organization. It's based on losses and on gains. If our gains are greater, then let's focus on the gains type setup thing. Yeah, well, so many of these petitions and so many of these proposals have been put forward to the government of the country for so very many years. Apparently, this issue has been lasting for 17 years in the land, AI power cuts. And when they started back then, I remember when I was in my early 20s, they were only 2 hours a day. For over a couple of days, you wouldn't see another power cut for another 2 or 3 weeks. And now it's every single day, 3 times a day, anything going from, it used to be just 2 hours, but now it is 4 and now 6 hours. We are currently in a power cut 17 years down the line, and they still won't listen to Janse van Rieensbeck. They still won't listen to Kutsia, because it's literally that, Kutsia, and he's got blue eyes and blonde hair, and for those reasons they don't want to hear him out. Unforgiveness is the bane of the existence of any ecosystem at all. They refuse to acknowledge that that white people might have made a mistake back in the day, but they still have brains and they still have innovation, and frankly they have the chunk of the money in this country still, and for those reasons they invest in organizations, companies that actually grow. They grow and they do well, and so they have got a proof of concept that's already ready and built because they had the resources to invest in it. And due to the fact that they're white, the black government just refuses to let them fix the situation because of unforgiveness. I don't care how scared you might be of a white president in this land. Bottom line is, there is no South African that is happy with this power cut crisis, otherwise, unless they're crazy. There is no single South African that is happy with this, including Mr. Kutsia, albeit looking forward to a future of being reinvested in the presidential mansion, albeit that being a potential for him if at all he fixes the electrical infrastructure. The guy is not nefariously sitting by thinking that if they don't take up my project, I am not even going to dare let them know that it is possible for them to live a better life in this country. I promise you, everybody wants this thing to be taken out of the way, irrespective of whatever political nuances might be attached to successfully flipping a model in a country that is headed for the dogs. Nobody wants to live in this this darkness. And so politics is literally likely the last thing that Kutsia and Van der Westhuizen are thinking about when they're thinking about flipping the model of the country's electrical infrastructure over. And yet the black government is like, you're not gonna take my presidency. All the best. Watch yourself holding on to life and losing it anyway. Next.